All right, I'm about halfway through the air. It's first thing in the morning for me, which is mid-afternoon. And, I've only got little 4-bar chunks here on the air. And I went ahead and ended up spending 10 minutes on each of the chunks instead of 5. They just needed it. I ended up doing some hand separate practice, which I hate to do. When I have to do that, it's usually something that this is beyond me. Like I've already mentioned, this one is definitely just out of my reach, but I really want to work on this one because it's a practical thing for me. Rather than just, like for show or anything. So there's just a couple of things that are really horrendous here. This bar right here at letter D that I have there, that thing's just a nightmare. Anybody who's worked on this knows where that's at, and that's just there's just so much active happening. I think what really gets me, I was able to mostly get the right hand pretty good. It's the big rolls and just lining everything up and still having the rolls happen. The other thing that, after that, it's pretty fine to the end. After that, it was the rolls in the right hand in the section before are kind of a mess for me. It's these. Those, they've put these really legato fingerings in the piece. And actually, whoever did it, they have they're brilliant fingerings for legato fingerings. I do feel like they're a little over the top in terms of like is anybody really gonna notice, and once you have this at tempo, if that particular note decays 1/16th note earlier? On a string maybe, but strings are actually sustaining actively, not like piano. So like I said, I think this is a thing where in a gig situation I would muscle through this or use the pedal to muscle through it, and because of the big rolls I can't even take advantage of these organ style fingerings to actually play it on organ, because the rolls I won't be able to sustain the other voices. But no, what was specifically bothering me about these rolls here is they're expecting you to sustain these voices underneath after that roll, and it's like it's I think they're tenths. Once it gets over a certain point, I think it might be an 11th in a couple of cases, and it's impossible. Some of them are like white to black key, and I can't hold that voice, and it's frustrating. That's actually a spot where it would make sense to hold the voice over. Can't do it. There's just no way. I'm trying to hold the top or the middle note of this chord in each case where it happens. Just have some finger sustain, but that's probably the biggest nightmare. I will say that I sort of have this at a metronome tempo. I marked one in the D section, which it feels like I'm playing so slowly and barely getting any of it. It feels horrendous, but realistically, once I set the metronome, mostly to get a litmus test for where I was at, I've got the 16th note at about 40, which is crazy slow, but that's almost half tempo, which is actually a pretty good place to be in for reading hands together. A lot of times, I tell people that that should sort of be your gauge for whether or not something is beyond you. If you can't read the majority of it, hands together at roughly half tempo, it's probably beyond you. This one definitely is still beyond me because my reading was not that good, and I'm not quite to half tempo. But I feel a lot better about it because I have a little bit of control in some of these sections, and I'm going to work back to the B and the A section, which I seem to recall are not nearly as complicated. It was always towards the end of the page, once my brain had completely turned to mush from trying to read through this, that it just fell apart. So that's feeling better than it was definitely on the first reading and even the first practice. So I do think I'm probably going to go ahead and spend a little extra time just to get this one off the ground. So 10-minute sessions on each of the sections, which is a little frustrating because I'd like to have more time for other things, but gotta do what I gotta do. Well, I finished working on air. The A and B sections went a lot better than the last two sections. So that one's actually coming along nicely.
Alright, so I'm getting ready for the gym, but before I go, I made a point of looking at the hardest section of the Pulong, my little B section. Mostly just, like I said, if that's a decoding issue for me, there's nothing technically difficult. It's just, wrapping my brain around bars that are full of like B double flats and F flats and C flats, and just reading all of it. But that actually went pretty well. I feel like I made some progress. I only spent 5 minutes on it. I might spend another 2 or 3 minutes just reading through that section again when I get back, because I feel like that one just needs a little more. I think I need to be looking at it more frequently. I don't need to be really practicing it because there's nothing really technical. I just need to make my brain go over that material a couple of times so I get more comfortable reading those chords.
Okay, so I've made it to the church, getting ready to do some organ. I spent most of my time at the gym just listening to all these songs, or a lot of the songs, a lot of the music I'm doing. Yeah, songs. Somebody's going to get salty about that. Anyway, I listened to All I Ask of You while deadlifting, which is probably like the least appropriate thing ever. Mostly just to kind of get the words and the melody in my head. For things that I'm going to do vocally, especially if I have to comp under it, I basically just have to semi-memorize what else is going on, so I'm not trying to read too many things at once. I listened to the Ed Sheeran Thinking Out Loud, just trying to figure out exactly what I would want to do with that, and also listening and thinking about the voice. I was kind of singing, humming quietly, and trying to just feel out spots in my voice with that song. I think I might have to bring the key down. I'm not sure. He does a lot of that thing where he's got that kind of edgy grind to his voice at the top for the very highest parts. So that can work for you to be singing higher than you really can, because when you listen to him, he's singing higher than he really can. But it makes a good effect. I don't have that much control. My pop singing is honestly terrible. I'm more of a choral person. I'm not even good as a soloist in more classical styles, honestly, even though I get called to do it a lot when I have gigs, vocal gigs. I end up doing it, but I feel like I'm terrible at it. But no, I might have to change the key on that and just figure out what I want to do with that. The other thing I listened to the Bach, the BWV 639, and it made me really aware of how much I really need to just dive in and maybe do some research on the ornamentation. I just don't know. I hear and read so many conflicting things, and it's a very frustrating thing. I do remember on the Scarlatti, basically every recording I heard, especially the piano recordings, people put lots of rotations on the mordents. And the thing that bothered me is that in that piece there are trills and there are mordents, and basically people weren't making any distinction between those. They basically just made them sound the exact same with lots of rotations, and because of how quickly they were playing it, which also I feel like people were just playing it ludicrously fast for the sake of just, let's see how much of an athletic endeavor I can make this. I played it too slowly when I finally played it, but it really I feel like they're just going too fast, and you kind of lose something. You almost can't hear exactly what's happening with their approaches on the ornaments. But that's really an issue. I wanted a single rotation on the mordents and more rotations on the trills. Also, I would approach the trills from the top, and I would approach the mordents from the primary note. Now with Bach, I know that it gets a lot more complicated. And I've read things that suggest that you should always start, at least on organ, you should always start trills on the top. Okay, so I have finished up with the organ. Good times here. The worst part is having to shut all of this down and getting everything set back the way it was and changing shoes. I gotta take off my organ shoes. But let's see. My brain is a little bit fried at this point. I started with the Wedding March, which this is one of those things where That was a dumb move. I shouldn't have done that. And it's a thing I would tell people not to do, and I did it. What I did was I started with the thing that probably needs the least work. I think there's some part of my mindset that just thinks, well, this one will be fairly easy, let me get it out of the way. Which, there's a small amount of merit to that, but I don't know. I don't know that it was the best decision tonight, because when it comes to practice and you only have so many resources mentally, especially when I'm here, I'm trapped in this room, and I have to get all my organ work done basically in one go, which I also hate to do. I shouldn't have worked on the thing that needed the most or the least work the first, but whatever. That one's great. It's going really well. It's a little different playing it on organ than piano. You have to be a little more careful just because of the action of the organ. Also, there's some manual switching going on, and I had to set some pistons to change some stops, and then I practiced some of the transitions between the A and the B section, dealing with the piston changes. I don't really have those nailed down. But no, I can play the whole thing at a consistent tempo. Basically, it's all in metronome range. I can easily do it all at a good tempo, just not all the way at tempo, because I'm really focusing. This is one of those where right out of the gate, the pedal part is easy enough that I'm just doing pedal from the get-go, which is not always the case with me on organ, just because my organ playing is very poor. Then I worked on Canon next, which is probably what I maybe should have started with. I guess one of the things about this is it's nice because basically that cello part that everybody knows and complains about, that's basically the same notes for the entire song. Those are all in the bass and in the feet. They're in the pedals. So the pedals don't change, which makes the pedals relatively easy. It doesn't mean there's not a coordination thing. What it ends up doing in terms of how it affects the arrangement, though, is that because they don't have to always have the bass note somewhere in the left hand, which you would with a piano arrangement typically, they can get a lot more creative with what's happening in both manuals and really employ both of your hands, maybe a little more than I would like. So it means that the manual part's a little more interesting. Also, it's all the typical stuff with organ. The things that make organ kind of unique from piano, I have to very much mind my note releases in a lot of places. And there are a lot of situations where I just have to do really interesting fingerings because I have sustains that really matter, because you just can't let off. If one note is sustaining for several bars, you have to keep that note down and play around it, because it sounds very clearly the entire time. There's no decay like piano. Keep hearing noises. It's creepy here at night sometimes, which is when I come up here to practice. But whatever, that one's gonna be fine. I basically set a metronome at half the tempo that I'm planning to go, and I just practiced with no feet. I practiced the first couple of sections, repetitions of that idea with the feet, and then I decided that it was probably just a better choice for me to really ensure that the manuals are mostly good. So this is going to be one of those cases, since the feet aren't something I really need to learn, and it's just coordination. I think I'll slowly check different sections going from beginning to end, get the manuals to tempo, actually push some of those sections up to tempo, and then basically drop them to half and add the feet, which it's a really similar strategy to what I would recommend people do if they're playing music that's too hard for them, which I don't recommend people do generally. But it's a thing I've had to do for gigs, where sometimes I just get given music that is harder than I should be working on. And in those cases, I will split up the hands. I actually will end up practicing significant portions hands separately, up to tempo. And then I'll basically cut the tempo directly in half and work it back up with both hands. That mostly just
that's if you've got lots of little technical limitations, you weed them out very quickly. But ultimately, I still don't feel like the best stuff to work on is stuff that requires you to spend any amount of large time hand separately. Anyway, back to organ. I did finish up with the Bach that I had mentioned earlier. I'm irritated that that in my practice I don't have a clear. I messed around with the ornaments a couple of ways, but I don't have a clear direction of exactly what I want to do. I'm probably just gonna have to decide because it's really it's hard sometimes to just add the ornaments later. I like to kind of add not trills, but mordents in particular. I like to add them sort of in tempo, very slowly, because if you get everything up to tempo and then you try to add them later for certain types of pieces, you suddenly find that you're lacking dexterity, or you didn't really allow for like fingers around it. So other than that, that one's going pretty well. The problem was, like I said, I wasted time on the wedding march at the top instead of at the end, and my brain was already pretty cooked by the Bach. It probably should have been Canon, then Bach, then the wedding march. And I might start with the Bach again next time, I'm not sure. It's just that I've spent more time with the Bach than I've spent with anything else, so I kind of deprioritized it. At some point, I need to record a little bit of my progress up here. I keep forgetting to bring my other metronome, and my phone's the only metronome, and so I end up not recording any of that practice. But no, the Bach I haven't moved the tempo up since basically the last time that I set tempos on it. But I'm getting better. It's easier and more accurate. It's a good feeling. It's something that I know that works really well when I get it to a point where everything's consistent at that tempo, and I basically almost play it until it's easy. If there's still spots that are hard, I don't really move forward. I will start only playing maybe the bar that's really hard for me mentally, because that's all it is. It's not the technical stuff, it's the mental stuff. It's the am I digesting and decoding in real time everything in this bar. So it's getting there. I guess I'll just have to hit it some more. Alright, so I just finished working a little bit on the piece from Phantom. I spent about 20 minutes on that. It was a mix of logistics and stuff. A lot of it was singing to kind of see where my voice is with it, working a little bit on actual comping, and then occasionally I would just do isolated block chord practice so I could really focus on the vocals. I was looking at the comping patterns for Christine's part, where I'll be playing under my wife singing that part, and then there's a big instrumental interlude that I worked on. So I spent a little extra time on this because it's not taxing. I decided to work on this instead of something more urgent like the Poulenc, because it's the end of the night and I'm tired. So I decided to do something a little less taxing, but still productive, which, that's kind of how you have to go. I would get nowhere with Poulenc, but I made good progress with this because it's just not that difficult. Something I forgot to mention is that between the gym and organ practice, I did, me and my wife sat down and watched the 2004 rendition of Phantom, so that I could just be aware of it. It's a good thing to be aware of the source material, or in the case of, classical music, being aware of other things that composer has done even for other instruments, especially for other instruments. I think pianists in particular forget about that. I didn't come from a piano background, so I was keenly aware of the fact that, usually a composer only wrote like maybe one or two things for my instrument in particular. So there wasn't a wealth of just like trumpet music for, by a composer. So I had to listen to a lot of their music and get a vibe for them generally. And, doing the legwork of research on historical reasons a thing was written or something like that. That's good to do. And so with, something like musical, it's pretty easy. Just sit down and watch it. Last month I watched Spirited Away because of that tune from the Piano Jam. Tempted to sit down and play this game that this other little things from that I've already forgotten the name of because I've looked at it like twice. But yeah, I didn't really like the movie for reasons that have more to do with the substance of it. You know, I kind of wanted to rant about that, but it's not really relevant. But no, there were problems with some of the way the story is portrayed that bother me as just a sort of general cultural problem and trope that I think is problematic. But I thought the performances were fine. You know, I'm sure that I was very surprised about Gerard Butler was doing was playing the Phantom. I was like, does he have any background? I was kind of googling around. I was like, apparently that was a fairly I don't know, the casting was not welcomed by all fans, which yeah, I'm sure I get that within any fandom of a musical. That there are people who are going to love and hate every different version of that musical. So it is whatever it is. I don't think I will say that my problems with it and my dislike of it have nothing to do with anything specific about the way it was done, the way it was staged or shot, or any of the lip syncing issues or any of that. That's irrelevant. It's the story, the core story, has problems for me. It's almost surprising to me that it's so popular, except it's not, because it shares a problem with many other things that have been very popular. Whatever. But no, you know, I'm glad I saw it. I'm glad I'm aware of it. So that's interesting. But yeah, not a huge fan. But I do like the song. I like this song, and there are a couple of other, you know, big pieces from the musical that I really liked. So glad that happened. Probably not sure if I'm going to go to bed now or if I'm going to go look at some of this other really easy music to just kind of run through it. Okay, so I decided to spend just a few minutes on the Chrono Trigger tune. And I kind of wanted to show you something because I didn't show last time the new edition that I had picked up. And I just want to show some examples of what is better here. If you're looking at this, you can see that the melody line is clear and it stems up. And the accompaniment line, even though there are weird things where the left hand goes into the treble clef, it stems down, so you know where the accompaniment at. There are these weird things where they want you to get the right hand to get involved with the accompaniment, but it's clear that it's still accompaniment, and that means that you will still voice it differently. So like right here, I'm not going to play this note as loud as this. Here's the melody. The melody goes from here to here. So this will be softer because they let me know it's part of the accompaniment. And over here's a really good example. You know, they could have done better with the stem here, but over here's a really good example where, once again, they could have written this slightly differently, but they didn't, so that they can make it clear where the melody is on the top and this is more of an accompanimental figure. So it's little things like that that really help make this stuff readable. People who have read a lot of music get used to lots of little things like consistency of spacing that you overlook. You don't think about it if you were like writing something by hand and had no training in music notation, and a lot of people don't. And then, you know, a lot of little stuff like that. It really matters, and it makes those other versions frustrating that I often find on MuseScore. So I do think the Chrono Trigger is going really nicely. I decided to work on it because kind of winding down. I didn't have to spend much time on it.